Good evening, everyone. This is Dawn, ASQ Innovation Division Education Chair. Thank you for joining this webinar brought to you by ASQ Innovation Division. Please note that this webinar is recorded and the recording will be available on ASQ Innovation Division YouTube channel. Also, there will be 5 to 10 minutes time after the presentation for questions and answers. Please post your questions in the Q&A section of the WebEx tool. Tonight's webinar is Creating an Innovation Culture. One of the first questions people ask about innovation is, how do I create a culture of innovation? The real question is, how can I get creativity to coexist with an execution culture? This webinar will give you the answers to that question and show the essential behaviors and organization structure you need for innovation. The learning objectives are the primary behaviors in an innovation culture, the differences between creative and execution behaviors, how a creative and an execution culture can coexist. Tonight, our presenter is Mr. Peter Merrill. Mr. Peter Merrill is a keynote speaker on innovation and has keynoted at conferences in cities such as Dubai, Mumbai, and Shanghai. He has spoken in Prague, London, and Helsinki. He began his career in R&D working on projects such as desalination and acrylics for carbon fiber. Later, as chief executive of one of the leading design brands in Europe, he led innovation in one of the most demanding markets. He is an engineer, an artist, and a writer, and has led innovation in the fields of both graphic art and engineering. He is one of the North America's foremost authorities on management systems, which has implemented in such innovative companies as IBM, AIG, and RIM. He was founding chair of the ASQ Innovation Division. He currently chairs the Canadian National Committee to ISO TC 279, the Technical Committee on Innovation Management, and also chairs the ASQ Innovation Think Tank. He is author of the books Innovation Generation, Innovation Never Stops, The Executive Guide to Innovation, and Do It Right the Second Time. He writes the innovation column for Quality Progress. Now I'd like to hand over to Mr. Peter Merrill. Peter, please take it away.
Dawn, thank you very much for that introduction. That's quite a lot to live up to. Thank you. So what I'm going to talk about is this issue of coexistence. But first of all, I'm going to just give you a bit of quick background. Some of this you may have heard me talk about previously, so I'll get through the first few slides fairly quickly. First of all, the reason why innovation has become so important for us. And that is really because of the incredibly rapid change that we're experiencing in our world. Change in the marketplace, change in technology, especially digitization, and that in turn is leading to advances in healthcare, leading to people being able to live longer. But the negative, of course, as we all know, is the warming environment. So technology is not all good. And as a chemical engineer, I take some of the responsibility for that last issue. That's one of the reasons I often talk about environmental management as well as quality management. But the bottom of this slide, you'll see the key statement here. It's from Charles Darwin. It's not the strongest that survive, nor the most intelligent, but the species most responsive to change. And that's the key issue here, that we've got to be agile in this world, and our organization has got to be agile. The way we deal with change is through innovating. And innovation is all about capturing new knowledge, which we then convert into new products and services. So knowledge is the fuel of innovation. And the question is, how do we get that knowledge? Well, that's where the issue of culture comes in. Culture is all about behavior, and we need behaviors in our organization which are going to release all the different levels of knowledge that we have inside us. If you were to explore the field of knowledge management, you'll find they talk about explicit knowledge, which is knowledge that's documented. And, you know, back in the 90s, people thought they could document everything. At the most, you can document perhaps 20% of the knowledge in your organization. If you try to do more than that, you bring everything to a standstill. You just become fat and lethargic. Tacit knowledge is the knowledge we keep in our heads, and that's usually fairly retrievable. It's that subconscious knowledge deep down that we've acquired over the years and which is incredibly valuable, and which is why creativity is getting so much attention now, because creativity is really ways, it's about finding behaviors where we can release that subconscious knowledge. So all of that is the kind of stuff we're going to do if we're going to be creative. But you notice the bottom line on this slide reminds us that it's not just about coming up with ideas, it's also about executing. You can have the best idea in the world, the most potentially profitable, but if you don't get it out there, it's a waste of time. So let me take you now into the innovation model. And this illustrates how we actually need two cultures. You'll see on the left-hand side of this screen, on the top of the screen, I talk about the creative phase, where we find opportunities and we come up with concept solutions. They're often called ideas. A lot of people actually get this completely wrong. They think ideas come out of nowhere, but ideas have to be driven by opportunity in order to be relevant. Where a lot of people get in trouble is they don't separate these two steps in the innovation process. You find many organizations degenerate their innovation process into a suggestion scheme, and that really goes nowhere. So that's the creative stuff, the top half of the slide. And then the lower half of the slide, development and delivery, we can call that the execution phase. And this is the hard work, actually. It's not as exciting as the creative stuff, but it's a lot of grind. It does include creative stuff, but a lot of people, should we say, get it wrong at the development stage. I'll talk more about that later, where they think you have to still keep coming up with new ideas. You've really got to do the concept stuff in step 2 and then narrow your focus into the development stage, where your challenge is not to come up with new ideas, but to, in fact, choose your preferred ideas and make them easy to use. Step 3 and step 4, development and delivery. That's where Thomas Edison said, genius is 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. And you're probably familiar also, I'm moving fast through these first few slides, with these different roles. We have it on the Innovation Division website, where you can actually calculate which of these roles you fit best with. Creators are the people who find opportunities. They're often most comfortable in a marketing arena. Connectors are people who are good at concept solutions. If you did an assessment of a population of ASQ people, you would find more connectors than anything else. What's interesting is if you stepped outside of ASQ and you went out in the sort of general population, connectors are actually very much a minority. So creators and connectors are the people who find first the opportunity, then the solution. Then the developers, and I fall in that category, are people who make a solution work. They tend to be engineers. And then doers, people who get the solution out there, salespeople, production people, they're the results-focused kind of people. And this is the assessment chart that you can find either on a division website under the self-assessment, or you can go to my own website, petermerrill.com, and find the same assessment. On my own website, you can actually download a PDF which explains all of these roles. So let me explain these roles in a bit more detail. First of all, the creators. They see an unmet need. They find that opportunity. They usually, like I said, marketeering people, research people. They're very practical and hands-on. They work best in an open network. People who know people who know people. That's an open network. They like to operate in a free and loose mode, and that's how their subconscious is released. Connectors are quite similar, but they're much better than creators at defining the problem. Creators don't do that very well. Connectors really are good at defining problems, and people in the quality profession know how to do that. The term connector comes from the fact that they connect to solutions. What's interesting is not many solutions are original. They often come from exploring and looking around and looking at different environments. The classic story here is of Henry Ford when he was looking for his solution for mass production in the car environment. He was walking around a meat factory, saw meat hanging on hooks, moving around the factory, and he said, yeah, there's my answer. Someone else had thought of the answer before, but he was able to conceptualize it. The people who tend to fit in this category are design people, R&D, primarily the research part of R&D. These people are much more thinkers than the creators are, but they're very similar to creators in that they work well with an open network. Both creators and connectors need that looseness. Important thing that a connector, though, has to remember is that one answer is not enough. You keep looking for new answers. You try and generate as many as possible. Linus Pauling had a saying that the best way to get a good idea is to get lots of ideas. So then we move into the execution phase. And this is where the developer, typically an engineer, is tasked with finding the user-friendly solution. And this is where people often go wrong. Instead of making the solution easy to use, they keep putting bells and whistles on. We lose sight of the fact that ease of use is one of the things that's going to make our offering successful in the marketplace. Engineers are developers, systems designers are developers. These are a bit like connectors. They're also fairly strong thinkers. But the difference here with developers is they operate better in a closed network. In other words, close to people who they know well and trust so that they can share ideas quickly and easily, and they communicate quickly and easily. They operate in a tight kind of mode. They're driven by getting a result, making the solution work. And then the doers are the people who deliver, sales and production people. Not like developers, though. These doers, they're very practical. But they are like developers in that they work better with a closed network and, again, in a tight mode. So big lesson out of all of this is if you are going to be successful at innovation, you need all of these types of people. And the culture of your organization needs to accommodate all of these types of people. And I can tell you straight away, developers and doers will crush creators and connectors if they're given a chance. They are so focused, so results-driven, whereas the creative phase people, creators and connectors, need time and space. So a little more then about how people relate to each other. In the creative phase, the creative network is often called an open network. It's dispersed. It contains people from many different disciplines. Diversity is a word you'll have heard a lot. You want to network with people who are customers and people who are not yet customers, with your business partners, because all of these people are a source of knowledge. This phase of creativity is where you share and grow knowledge. It's where you find opportunities and conceptual solutions. And, you know, there's huge evidence out there to show that the best way of growing knowledge is through an open kind of network. I remember when I was doing a bit of research on this, I was shocked to find that more people find jobs through connections than through advertisements. I still find that hard to believe, but it is true. The vast majority of people finding new jobs do it through somebody they know, and where that somebody knows somebody else. It's not just that you've got a personal friend, it's you know somebody who knows somebody else. The second phase of the innovation process, the execution phase, is where we shift to a closed network, people working tightly together and collaborating. This forms much more easily than the open network. We tend to gravitate to people like ourselves. We're comfortable with them. We tend to recruit people into our company who are like ourselves. You may have heard the term the mirror effect in recruitment, where we try so often to find people we recognize as being like us. The execution network, here's the really good news, actually forms naturally from the creative network or open network. Open networks form into closed networks. Why? It's very simply because people get to know and trust each other, and they form that bonding. So that's good news when you're working through an innovation project. I've talked quite a bit about the structure and the types of people. Now let me get into culture itself. Culture's about behavior, and a creative culture is where we produce new ideas through imagination and being unconventional. Disney called it Imagineering. This occurs when we've got freedom, space, and when we interact with stimuli that are new. This guy, we recognize him, Albert Einstein said, no problem can be solved with the same level of consciousness that created it. And that's what creativity is about. It's about creating a new level of consciousness. The challenge is, and people intuitively recognize this, the challenge is that space, that time for being creative has been taken away from us by the daily work that we do. You might have heard me say before, you know, we work in a box, we have lunch in a box, and we think in a box. So you've also heard the term step out of the box. And the way we do that is through these kinds of behaviors. Exploring, going into different worlds, seeing new things, experiencing new stimuli, and meeting new people. Interacting with people who are different from ourselves. And that takes us into the second key behavior in a creative culture. The ability to collaborate. Mix with people who are different from us and accept their difference. It's often difficult. Their behaviors may even antagonize us because we don't like that different kind of behavior. I know when I'm working on a team and a guy's disruptive, I find it very hard to work with it. And yet, this is how new ideas come through. Through my own work in ISO, I've learned the huge value of collective knowledge and collaboration. You know, there are times when I've been in a debate and, you know, it's come close to there being blood on the floor, as the saying goes. And yet, that is the way you get the best solutions. And having got an idea or a solution, you experiment. You're willing to try something out, and you're willing to fail. And those sorts of behaviors are what we want to develop. So let me develop them a little more. Exploration and observation, taking those together. That's about going places, meeting people. You hear the term networking, but not virtual networking, face-to-face networking. That's why conferences are so important. It's not just about sitting and listening to somebody at a conference. It's about meeting new people, different people. And certainly if you've got the opportunity to go to World Conference at the end of this month, there's going to be huge opportunities there for networking. You know, the excuse me, the Innovation Division booth, we've got a constant stream of people coming through. And when you network, this is where you find opportunities. What's bugging people? Where are they having trouble? That is where you get new opportunities. And you, at the same time, when you network, you may often come up with new solutions. You get that sudden aha moment, the epiphany, as it's sometimes called. But what we've learned is that those new ideas don't come quickly and easily. They're not forced. Essentially, it's about learning. Peter Senge wrote a book called The Fifth Discipline, hard to believe, over 20 years ago now. It's one of the landmark books in the quality profession. And there's a famous quote from his book, which was from a man in Royal Dutch Shell called Harry de Goos. He said, "The only competitive edge an organization has is the ability to learn faster than the competition." So then we get into the collaboration stuff. You know, we've learned that breakthroughs come where bodies of knowledge intersect. It's the old think tank principle. Mix up a group of very diverse people, and you get that essential jolt which releases collective knowledge, the spark of genius, as it's sometimes called. And what that means is that if you are going to work with people who you find it difficult to work with, and we've got to try to do that, we need to develop an understanding of them. It takes time. Relationships take time. Understand the other person. As Stephen Covey said, seek to understand before you seek to be understood. That was from his famous book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And you'll notice at the bottom of the page here, I've mentioned 2 guys who were great collaborators. J.R. Tolkien, Lord of the Rings, of course, and C.S. Lewis, Chronicles of Narnia. They used to meet in a pub in Oxford in the 1930s every Tuesday evening, have a couple of beers and talk. And those wonderful books, Lord of the Rings and Chronicles of Narnia, they were a result of those 2 people collaborating. You can see similarities in those books because of their sharing of ideas, but they weren't afraid to share because it was two-way traffic. And that's what collaboration is all about. It's not about taking, it's about giving and taking. And then experimentation. You know, as we've learned to understand risk, particularly as risk becomes front and center in the new ISO standards, we've tended to avoid risk, and yet you should really use risk to evaluate opportunity, not use risk to kill opportunity. When we experiment, we want to do it with people outside of our organization. Certainly the business I ran in the UK, our biggest customer was Marks and Spencer's, and they were deeply involved at this experimentation stage. We were close to the customer. One of the challenges, I guess, we have culturally these days is that people run away from failure. If they see something's not going to work out, they all distance themselves. We need to celebrate failure as a lesson learned. We don't, in fact, use the word failure. We talk about a learning experience. And you'll see on this slide I've mentioned WD-40. That was invented by a guy called Norm Larson in California in 1953, and he called it water deterrent number 40 because he'd had 39 previous failures. That was his own personal way of celebrating his lessons learned. So experimentation is not to find out if it works. It's about learning more and developing new, better solutions. So creative solutions, in order to get these, we want people who will work together and understand the problem. That's the first thing. They need to know about the problem. You don't want to bring people in cold who have no knowledge. Now, you bring in people who are different. The diversity is important. And you want people who will challenge things. You even want disruptors. You know, I find myself saying that, and I hate it when somebody's in a team disrupting, and yet they are necessary. Bring in people from outside of the company, customers and suppliers. And it's this mixing of disciplines that creates that spark of genius. So to just quickly define the creative process, if we're going to come up with a new idea, the first thing we have to do is get a clear definition of the problem. I don't know what definition was given to the guys who decorated the Sistine Chapel, but it's certainly quite a work of art. It wasn't just one guy who did it. There were actually 14 people working on this over quite a long period of time. But let me get back to creative problem solving. We start off with a clear definition of the problem. Have people write ideas on their own, in privacy, 2 or 3 ideas which they feel are potential solutions to the problem. And then there are many different methods of creative problem solving. There's a great book called Cracking Creativity, which outlines a large number of these different methods. But essentially, they're all based on circulating ideas and stimulating new ideas and injecting a degree of randomness into the way ideas are circulated. What's important is that creative problem solving eliminates that loud voice. That person is going to say, well, we tried that before and it didn't work. Oh, I know that isn't going to work, but especially a senior person. So they're all different techniques which take away that fear of rejection and which allow wild ideas. You know, one of the great things about creative problem solving is when people start to laugh. You know that you've got great new ideas coming out. If you follow, and by the way, I always encourage you to try many different types of creative problem solving. Don't just keep using the same type each week, because different people will respond to different methods. But generally speaking, creative problem solving will come up with 40% more ideas than if you do analytical problem solving. And I've just listed a couple of examples at the bottom of the page: brainwriting, clustering. Clustering was a technique that Stravinsky used when he was writing his ballets 100 years ago. These methods are not radically new. It's just that the world of innovation has recognized how powerful creative problem solving actually is. So we're now at the tipping point in the innovation process. up till now, I've been talking about creative behaviors and the creative culture. Now we have to pick our solution. We may pick 2 or 3, and we narrow our focus. And that's where we change our behavior quite dramatically, and we get into the execution culture. You need a tight team. You need a lean process. This is where a quality management system is necessary. We have focus. We move with speed. And, you know, wrapping things in excessive secrecy slows things down. And, you know, if you've come up with a great idea, I can pretty well guarantee somewhere else on this planet, someone else has seen the opportunity you found and has probably come up with a similar solution. What differentiates you? Speed, not secrecy. So in the execution culture, we want discipline, focus. We do keep some creativity, but we want a strong process. Because for 3,000 original ideas, only 1 is going to make it. And this is where we get to that 99% perspiration phase. This is hard work. So the sort of behaviors we see here is a strong sense of mission, the desire to get a user-friendly solution out there in the marketplace. And where people who are thinkers go wrong, they want to stay in that creative mood. You've got to stop that. You want high focus, speed and discipline, a strong work ethic, and really good project management with good monitoring and good control. I hope you're feeling different now as I talk about execution compared to that creative phase that I was discussing previously. So the mission here is delivery. The quality management system is what delivers here. And a key job for leaders is to monitor the change in behavior. No more of the blue sky stuff. Get on with the job. They need to be reviewing regularly progress. This is good project management, either monthly or quarterly. When I worked in R&D, we used to do it bi-monthly, every 2 months. It depends a lot on the size of your organization. And as you move from the creative phase, the group working on the project is probably going to change its membership. You now need a lot more operations and salespeople. And as you move through the execution phase, as you develop the working solution, you need to keep an eye on risk and ROI, because both of those will change as you refine the solution. And you will need to keep adjusting your plan. So let me talk about how we structure creativity and execution to coexist. This is I guess you might call it the secret sauce that not many people recognize. Organization structure is fundamental to enabling these 2 very different behaviors to live together. The challenge is that organizations that grow become less agile. You know, you see a startup, half a dozen guys, great idea, they build up to about 40 people, and they become successful with that great idea. But then they reach a sort of critical mass in which they can't change as easily. So we want to find a way in which that agile creative stuff can coexist with the high-focus delivery stuff. So structure based very much on what is the optimum size for a business unit. And this is actually incredibly logical. If you look at an organization structure, if you look at us as individuals, as communicators, our optimum communication span is about 6 people. Hey, we've known that for millennia. A scout patrol is 6 people. You know, it's a natural unit. The other thing which we know, but we tend not to recognize, is that once an organization gets beyond 3 layers, it becomes dysfunctional. So if you take an average of 6 people span, you know, sometimes there may be just 2 or 3 people span, sometimes there may be 8 or 10, but an average of 6 people span and a 3-layer organization, the mathematics actually work out at 259 people. Okay, it's not that precise, but the point is, once you get over 300 people, the organization has communications problems and becomes less agile. And I'm sure you've experienced that in your own working life. So solutions, there are a number of different solutions to get this agility to coexist with execution. But one is the spin-off. A big organization says, okay, I'm going to spin off this creative new business. Some of the rules, if you do that, are you certainly want to reduce hierarchy. You want to retain diversity in that spin-off. Keep it relatively independent of the main body. And one of the things we have learned is that the leader of the spin-off needs to report to a higher level than they normally would in the parent organization. Why? Corporate politics. Somebody somewhere in the main organization does not want this new idea to succeed because it jeopardizes their own life in the corporation. It jeopardizes their position. So a couple of things that you also have to do in a spin-off is separate the IT function and the HR function, because both of those are about knowledge and about behaviors. So you need separate IT and HR. And examples of companies who've done the spin-off approach, Procter & Gamble. It was a short-term solution. I have to tell you, I'm not a great fan of the spin-off. I think it's bypassing or sidestepping the problem. But back in 2003, when A.G. Lafley was the CEO at Procter & Gamble, he outsourced his creativity. And he worked with a company called Incentive, which is an R&D company. And that worked. And interestingly, after he retired, they got in trouble. They brought him back, but he was not able to repeat the magic of 2003. Why? Because it is a temporary solution. Lockheed Martin, go even further back. Back in World War II, they did the spin-off thing. They called it Skunk Works. They separated off their R&D, their creative activity, into a separate building. They called it the Skunk Works. It owes that name to Little Abner, the illicit still, you know. Anyway, the big problem here with spin-off is communication. So I want to give you there are many different solutions, but one of the solutions that really works is Goretex, Bill Gore. If you're an outdoor person, you've heard of Goretex. Bill Gore, he's, long past Bill has. His son now is close to retirement running the organization. I remember when I used to work with the big corporation in the UK, Courtaulds, we were a textile company. We used to look at Goretex and say, how do they do this? They have been around for half a century. They are one of the most creative businesses. They don't seek fame, but they do get fortune. They're a multi-billion company. They keep their business units to 150 or 200 people. They use the campus approach to structure. They don't have corporate towers. They were the originator of that idea of self-managed teams back in the 50s and 60s. And their teams are 8 to 12 people, and they have salespeople and R&D people working on the same team. Too often companies separate those. because the salespeople have got a different kind of behavior to R&D people. Salespeople are the great talkers, R&D people are the great thinkers. We don't want to mix them up. Yet that is the secret, having those people working closely together. So I give you W.L. Gore as one very effective example that's been around for half a century, highly innovative company. And then another thing which I've kind of touched on repeatedly as I've gone through, something you do need to be conscious of, and that is as you move through a project, you need to be changing the membership of the project team. There are those people who will only be effective in the creative phase. And, you get to the tipping point, move them back to new projects. There are equally people who are deliverers and will only work in the execution phase. Bring more of them in as you get later into the project. So good companies structure looseness into the organization. Good examples of this are Google. They are famous for giving a day a week to their creative people to pursue wild ideas. Interestingly, the word got out a couple of years ago that they were under enormous pressure from stockholders to drop that because it wasn't given an immediate return on investment. But that allocated time is something that not just Google, but 3M, Hewlett-Packard, all of these companies in different ways have been doing that for many years. All of these companies practice this group genius on a regular kind of basis. So the question is then, how do we begin to do this? Well, you need a change management model. And the one I like is that of John Cotter. He's been around for a long time. His book, Leading Change, was published 20 years ago now. His model still works. He starts off by saying, okay, if you are going to engage in innovation, being the change we want, you need to create a sense of urgency, often called a burning platform. You need a core team of people, and they are tasked with getting an early win. So people think, yes, innovation is possible. You'll notice I've added in a step called assessment. That's often a good thing to do to create the sense of urgency. I won't go through all Cotter's steps, but essentially the early win is a critical thing, and you'll see going to the right of the model at the top there's a thing called critical mass. You really want to aim to get a critical mass in a year. If you get more than that, your culture change will die. So let me summarize. I've hit the 40-minute mark, and let me talk in summary what I've covered. I strongly suggest that you look at your own organization and find your strengths and weaknesses. If you want to do an organizational assessment, we actually have an online assessment that you can carry out if you go to our website. But to start a project, you need to find an opportunity, an unmet need that your organization can pursue. You may start off internally. I would encourage you to look outside, though. But form a team and execute a project. That is how you will get the culture change that you would need if you want to become an innovative organization. Okay, it's 8:13 on my clock. I think I've just burned my 40 minutes. So, Dawn, let me handle back to you before my throat collapses. And if there are any questions, I'll certainly take them.
Thank you very much again, Peter, for your presentation. I should remind that you can post your questions in the Q&A section of the WebEx tool. So I can see so far 2 questions have been posted. The first question is, why do we need randomness?
Yeah, and that, for a quality professional is culturally counterintuitive, because one of the things we've been trying to do for so long is bring order into chaos. Randomness, though, is part of system thinking. And I haven't mentioned system thinking in this talk, but there's a lot of really good material out there. One of the earliest books on it, on system thinking, was a book called Chaos by James Gleick. More recently, a book called Linked by Albert Laszlo Barabasi. What this system thinking, and by the way, the fifth discipline, which I mentioned earlier, was the first book to introduce system thinking. What these all do is recognize we can't control the universe. And that's where I think we're growing up in terms of our organization. We're allowing things rather than controlling things. And that's what leads us into randomness. Now, I need to put a definition on randomness. By the way, chaos theory isn't what you think. It's not about being chaotic. It's something different. But randomness is really saying allow time and space for things to emerge, because the human mind and the human body are complex. Our organizations are complex. So if you try to control things, you won't get new ideas, whereas if you allow time and space, you will. And things take time. The great story of Archimedes and his challenge to find out whether the king's crown was adulterated with base metals, that took him a long, long time to solve. And you may remember your physics teacher telling you that, well, he took a bath, the water overflowed, and he got the idea of specific gravity. But there's a lot more to it than that. He took a bath and he relaxed. And that is an example of allowing randomness so things can emerge, allow things to float to the surface. I'm not sure whether I fully answered the question there, but it was a very good question, a very important point. It's something that after 20, 30 years of trying to control the universe, we recognize you can't control, you've got to allow things. Okay, Dawn, thank you very much for that first question. You said there was another one.
Yes, thank you, Peter. There are more questions that have been posted. The next question is, does outsourced creativity partially lack proper understanding of the organization?
Could you say that one again, please, Dawn? Sorry, I didn't quite get.
Sure. Does outsourced creativity partially lack proper understanding of the organization?
Let me just check, does outsourced creativity, and then it was the second part of that I didn't quite understand, does it lack a proper understanding of the organization? Is that what
Correct.
It's saying?
Yes, does outsourced creativity partially lack proper understanding of the organization?
No, it doesn't. What it recognizes, and if I'm understanding the question correctly, what it recognizes is we don't know everything. Knowledge is huge, and you'll have heard the term the explosion of knowledge. What we want to be able to do is capture as much relevant knowledge as possible. Now, there was some great research done by IBM about 10 years ago, which emphasized that the best ideas actually do come from your own people, but in conjunction with your suppliers and your customers. So you work with people that you partner with, you use your own people. You are not going to get, and this for those of you who happen to be academics, this might sound like a slap in the face, but their research showed that the best ideas do not come from academia. The best ideas for your own business, I think this may be where this question is going, come by your own people partnering with your customers and with your suppliers. And that's really what good open innovation, I haven't used that term, good open innovation works like that. I don't particularly think that the Procter & Gamble approach was that good. It was a short-term answer. Their problem was R&D was taking 5 years to get a solution to market, and they wanted to fast-track it. And they brought the 5 years down to 5 months as a result of going outside. But that wasn't necessarily outsourcing creativity. They were just buying a quick answer, I think. Not sure whether I've given the best answer to that question, but hopefully that's enough anyway. Next question then, Dawn.
Thank you. Next question is, what can organizations whom are out of balance role-wise expect to see?
What can organizations who are out of balance role-wise, is that?
Yes, expect to see.
Expect to see. That question, that needs a bit more clarification because I don't understand what we mean by out of balance role-wise, and I don't know what the second part of the question, expect to see, is trying to say. So what I'm going to ask is that we move to the next question. Whoever asked that question, perhaps they could clarify it in the texting. Okay?
Yes, we can move on to the next question. What can you do to ensure innovative solutions and avoid setting into improvements that can be done more quickly and less expensively?
Yeah, okay, good question. You have to start with improvement. There's no question about that. Interestingly, that question reminds me of a couple of years ago, I was speaking at the European Organization for Quality Conference in Helsinki. And one of the speakers there was the famous Dr. Kano, K-A-N-O, famous for the Kano diagram. I remember him standing at the front of the audience saying, "There is no such thing as innovation, there is only breakthrough improvement." And I remember emailing my friend Jane Keithley in our division. I say, "I can't believe I'm hearing this guy." You know, the world has moved on. Okay, let me get back to the point of the question. You've got to start with improvement. Interestingly, past chair of the ASQ, John Timmerman, he used to be VP at Marriott Hotels in charge of innovation there. He's moved on since. But, you know, he was telling me how that's where Marriott started. They started with improvement. So you need that. But then you move on beyond improvement. And it's a question of understanding what is the difference. A very simple differentiation, it is simplistic, is that improvement keeps the same process. You've got a job that needs doing, you have a particular process to get the job done. Improvement just makes that process simpler, faster, better. You've heard those terms, faster, simpler, better. Innovation says, I'm going to get rid of that process. I've still got the job that needs doing, but I'm going to do it with a completely different process. And if it's a product, a tangible product that I produce, it may be a completely different product that I provide. That's innovation. And of course, the simplest example of innovation is where Amazon has replaced bookstores with Kindles. Now, Kindles are very convenient. I use them a lot. But they're not a substitute for the fun of sitting in a bookstore. I love doing that. I really do. So innovation is where you completely change the process and even the product or service that enables the customer to get a job done. Okay, back to you, Dawn.
Thank you. Next question is, for those audience members not familiar with brainwriting, could you elaborate on that concept?
Could you repeat that, Dawn? Sorry.
They want you to elaborate on the concept of brainwriting.
Oh, brainwriting. Okay. Yeah, you know, if you go on Google, you'll find out all you want about brainwriting. I'm not a fan of this, and the reason I'm not, I mention it because it's the easiest form of creative problem solving, but it's silent. People write things. That's what it's called, brainwriting. You have a problem statement. It goes on the wall, and you have a chart in front of you, and you'll find it if you go on Google. You have a chart in front of you, and you write down 3 possible answers. And then your page then goes to the person next to you, and it just keeps circulating around. It's often it's the platform that's used for virtual problem solving. You know, where people are scattered across the country, and you just simply circulate a document around each person electronically. What I find is a limitation here is that there's no conversation. And a big part of successful creative problem solving is the conversation. It's the laughing. It's the, oh, yeah, do you know what you just made me think of? It's the human interaction, which I really like. And the second method that I mentioned was clustering, which Stravinsky had used. And like many of the creative problem-solving methods, people write things down on cards, and then the cards are all shuffled and shared out again, and then people start talking to each other. And that conversation is so very important. Okay, Dawn, back to you.
Thank you. The next question is, how can a bottom-up approach be used to emphasize the merits of these approaches?
To emphasize the merits of
these approaches.
Oh, there's a lot of argument about top-down and bottom-up, but quite frankly, both are operating at the same time. You can't work one without the other. You need a strategy, which is the job of the leadership. You need collective knowledge, which is what often people are talking about when they say bottom-up. The problem I find is that people try to, let me phrase this the right way. They try to do bottom-up without giving direction, without saying what the problem is. And innovation degenerates into a suggestion scheme. And that is completely useless. And I can tell you from first-hand experience, it dies within a year. So you need both. You need strategy. Where is the business headed? You need a clear definition of the issues that the business is facing and that needs to solve. And then you need engagement, where you engage the collective knowledge and experience of all the people in your organization. That's how things work well. Okay, Dawn, back to you.
Thank you. Yes, I think we have time only for few questions. So
okay.
The next question is, how to or what should be the first step to drive creativity, innovation, culture in a highly regulated nuclear industry?
Yeah. That is a real challenge. There's no question. At the same time, coming from the chemical industry, and many of my friends were in the nuclear industry. All of those industries rely on creativity. So the question is, how do we get that to coexist? Well, in a way, that's been very much what I've covered this evening. Your challenge is always when you get to the development stage. You can get the creative stuff, the idea, the concept solution, and all of that working just fine. That is not a challenge in a highly regulated industry, because the regulator isn't worried about how many ideas you have. Where they get worried is where you start to put them into practice. And that's when they get really, really bothered. And so what happens then is that clearly one has to know one's regulator. One has to know one's regulations. And, you know, I'm a great believer in regulators when it comes to innovation. Because when you look at some of the innovations that have occurred in the last 20 years, where regulations had been taken away, they have led to huge disasters. And I think, for example, of the removal of financial regulations in the 1980s, which led to the crash of 2008. It was 20 years in the making, but when it came, it destroyed the lives of so many people. And regulation there is necessary in the world of innovation, and we have to respect it. But my view is that it only starts to impact when you get to the development stage. And that's where you can keep moving forward. And every environment's different. You can keep moving forward with your new ideas, but you need to keep talking to the regulator as you move forward. We wouldn't have had the advances that we've had in science and technology in highly regulated industries if there hadn't been that willingness to talk to the regulator and work with them. They're in many ways acting on behalf of the customer to make sure the customer's world is safe. Okay, Dawn, I may not have given the best answer on that last one, but hopefully it gave some answer, because I suspect the question came from somebody who was in a very specific industry, and I had to give a fairly general kind of answer, unfortunately.
Thank you, Peter. We have two more questions. The first one is, what other tools are used to effectively facilitate idea generation?
Yeah, I referenced that book, Cracking Creativity. That's a good place to go to. And if you go on your whatever search engine you use, I assume it's going to be Google or equivalent, and just look on creative problem solving. There are many, many techniques. Let me say this about it, though. I mentioned it briefly. When you do creative problem solving, it's not something you do for an hour once a year. It's something you do regularly. That's what people like Google, 3M, HP do. Every week they are ideating, and they are using different methods each time. So I encourage you to find a selection of methods, and I encourage you to do it on a regular basis. You don't need to even spend an hour, probably half an hour once a week on a particular problem, bringing a group together. Why? Some of the best ideas come in between those sessions, because people will go away and release thoughts in the intervening days. That's when some of the best ideas come. One more question then, Dawn.
Yes, the last question is, the speaker had stated that all 4 roles are integral. What happens if there is only 2 of the 4 roles, say creators and developers? How does that impact the organization productivity?
Okay, you need all 4. What will happen if you, and I've done many of these assessments, what I find very typically is that, you get an organization with a lot of connectors, but no creators. You will never get the right opportunities. If you've got creators and connectors, you'll come up with lots of ideas, but you'll never get them to market. All of these roles are necessary if you're going to get your final solution through to the marketplace. Okay, I think we're out of time, Dawn.
Yes,
so I do want to thank you very much for facilitating this and for doing such a great job. Thank you.
Thank you very much to you, Peter, for your presentation and answering all these questions. And I should remind the attendees that you can find the recording of this webinar on ASQ Innovation Division YouTube channel. Thank you all for joining this webinar, and have a good night.